Howdy, everybody. Welcome to Live Well, Be Well. I'm Kacie Schumann, Health Promotion Coordinator.
And I'm Bailey Dingfield, Health Promotion Intern.
And we're your hosts today, and we are going to be talking about burnout. This is a topic that I'm pretty excited about because I think it deserves more attention than it gets. And I do think we've started to hear about it more in the last 5 or 6 years or so, kind of in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. But similar to the general topic of mental health, I think there's still some stigma surrounding the topic of burnout, which causes people to be quiet when they're feeling the symptoms of burnout. Bailey, can you tell us what the actual definition of burnout is?
Yeah, definitely. So burnout is the chronic unmanaged stress that can lead to exhaustion of the mind, body, and spirit. Often this can kind of cause a sense of helplessness or detachment as well. But it's also important to note burnout isn't weakness. It's a stress response system that has been overactivated for too long. So there are more things going on than just mental processes, but also biological things.
And typically when we think of burnout, we think about being overworked, right?
Yeah, so it's actually recognized by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon. There's 3 main components of exhaustion, cynicism, and ineffectiveness. Exhaustion being just that feeling of being physically and emotionally drained. Cynicism is defined as more of a sense of detachment from your work or responsibilities, which can also be accompanied by negative thoughts and pessimism, that kind of thing. And then ineffectiveness is really just the diminished sense of accomplishment and self-worth in the work that you're doing, focusing on negative thoughts and not the positive parts. So some careers where burnout is more common include healthcare, social work, education, legal services, first responders, chefs and food service workers, pretty much a lot of jobs that are fast-paced or have more emotionally taxing parts.
Yeah, and it sounds like even some of those have kind of physical risk too associated with them, when you think about first responders. So there's lots of things or situations that can cause burnout at work, but some of the more common ones that I do want to mention include working in a high stress environment, having a high workload, or on the flip side, not having enough of a workload and feeling unfulfilled at work. Maybe you just sit at your desk all day bored and you're like, what's the point of me even being here? Having a lack of control over your work, whether it's dictated by the work itself or maybe your supervisor or the organization you work at, feeling micromanaged, not getting recognized for your accomplishments at work. That's a huge one. When your values don't match the organizations that you work at, having unclear job expectations, and so you're kind of just floundering around, unsure what to do. And then, of course, this is one that we hear about a lot, work-life imbalance. So if work is really taking over your life, that can really be a high risk of burnout. Some interesting information I also wanted to mention, I found this on Mental Health America's website, is that individuals who are neurodivergent experience burnout just like everybody else, but they can also be impacted by additional factors. Some of those might include sensory overload at work, abrupt changes in routines at work, and not having accommodations met for any disabilities that they might have.
Yeah, I think that's really important for us to recognize what drains us and overwhelms us at work and how we can just be mindful of that in general.
Yeah, everybody's different.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk for a moment about the biology behind burnout. It typically gets thought of as just an emotional response, but like I mentioned earlier, the body responds physiologically as well. So I'm going to talk about some of the biological functions. So buckle up, we might get a little bit technical here. First of all, there's a disruption of the stress response system. This means that excessive production of stress hormones like cortisol can cause a dysregulation in your brain, which means it's pretty much just not functioning as it should. This can lead to a higher sensitivity to stress in general and a reduced ability to relax, which can also lead to sleep disorders. Second, it can cause dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, which is actually what controls your fight or flight response. So it can cause an overactive fight or flight response, which obviously is important if you're in danger, but not as much just in your day-to-day life. And it can just cause continuous arousal and increased heart rate and just stress in general. Another biological function that gets impacted is nutrient absorption. So if we have stress for a long amount of time, our body can not absorb the nutrients that it needs, and so we're not getting the correct nutrition. Another one is imbalance of neurotransmitter levels. Imbalance can lead to symptoms of depression, reduced motivation, and emotional instability. All of this information comes from an article in Health and Science magazine, which refers to a bunch of different studies and journal articles from the Journal of Applied Psychology, the Journal of Health Psychology, and other reputable sources.
Yeah, I really loved this article because it kind of put things in layperson's terms about how it can affect you. And something else that it touched on, which I appreciated, was the warning signs. I think sometimes these are hard to notice because we kind of just brush them off as being, or as saying like, oh, I'm just so tired today, or I'm just feeling a little under the weather or something like that. But it's important to remember that burnout builds slowly. So some of those little tiny symptoms that we might brush away, those are the warning signs that we need to pay attention to. And so one of those is chronic fatigue. So you're waking up exhausted even after a good night's sleep. Increased irritability. So maybe you run into a small inconvenience in your day and it like really, really frustrates you more so than it should. Lack of motivation, and I would say, lack of motivation more so than normal. We all have a day where we don't feel super motivated, but so tasks that maybe once brought you satisfaction now feel overwhelming or pointless and you just can't get them started. Physical symptoms, of course, things like headaches, digestive issues, or changes in appetite. The gut-brain axis is something you probably hear about a lot in social media, and that's a real thing. So if you're feeling issues in your gut, odds are you might be having high stress levels. And then finally, isolation. So withdrawing from your friends, family, social obligations, that's another sign of burnout. And something I want to add here is that the things going on in a person's personal life or kind of just the general state of the world can make burnout creep up even more quickly or make it feel much worse. Things like stressful global events, economic changes, and the rise of AI, all these things kind of just add to the burnout pile.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. So, Kacie, you're a workplace wellness professional, and we'll have another discussion on your job duties a different day, but how would you say that employers can help support employees that might be at risk of burnout?
Yeah, thank you for asking me this, because this is something that I think about all the time. I think one thing employers can do is stay consistent and stay steady as much as possible. When the world is in turmoil all the time, being consistent and predictable with things like policies, communications, that can just make things a little bit easier on employees. If you're making a ton of changes all the time, that can increase employee stress and resentment. Another thing employers and even just individual managers can do is practice empathy, be flexible when possible. Managers need to be trained to be able to recognize when an employee is overworked, overstressed, and just lend a kind, non-judgmental listening ear. And if that employee needs to take some time off to recuperate, employers and managers should allow that flexibility when possible. And I also just generally think building trust with employees all the time is really important, because then if an employee is approaching that burnout zone, if they trust their manager or their organization enough, they'll actually speak up and say, hey, I am operating at max capacity here. What can we do to distribute this workload differently, before they actually reach that burnout stage when it's too late? So, but of course, we can't put all the responsibility on the employer, on the manager. Employees do need to do their part in preventing burnout.
Yeah, definitely. So with that in mind, let's talk about some actual strategies that employees can use to prevent burnout. So we're going to go through 8 here. The first one is to set boundaries. Make sure you're prioritizing important tasks and saying no to less critical ones, or be able to delegate them to other people. Also, set clear work hours and stick to them when you're able to, and make time for relaxation and hobbies outside of work. Second one is mindfulness and stress management. You can practice daily mindfulness such as meditation, yoga, or sitting quietly for 5 to 10 minutes. Another example could be journaling to clear your mind and process different stressors you have going on in your life. There's also great apps like Headspace or Calm, which can support people who might be beginning to think about mindfulness or stress management in general. The third one is engaging in self-care. So this is stuff like getting a consistent sleep and getting balanced meals, regular exercise and physical activity, and even just connecting with and reaching out to loved ones, friends, family, those kind of things to prevent isolation. Fourth is reframing your perspective. Make sure you're focusing on the positive aspects of your job and personal life as well, and breaking larger tasks into smaller, manageable pieces. Also, celebrate small victories to stay motivated. Number 5 is ask for help. You don't need to handle everything on your own, so if you're feeling overwhelmed, definitely ask someone for help, reach out, get what you need. Number 6 is taking breaks and disconnecting. Take lunch away from your desk or go for a walk to clear your mind, something that gets you away from your work for a little bit. It's also good to set boundaries for checking emails after hours. Try not to do a ton of work outside of those set hours that you have. Also, planning regular vacations to fully recharge and spending those intentional times with friends and family. Number 7 is cultivate hobbies and interests outside of work. So this could be stuff like engaging in different activities that bring you joy or fulfillment and really just having a well-rounded life outside of work. Lastly, we have looking for opportunities to shine. So feeling recognized and valued can really help prevent burnout. This can be actively seeking out opportunities where you can add value to your work, in your community, or in your personal life. So, Kacie, do you feel like you use any of these strategies in your personal life to prevent burnout, or what has that looked like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I try my best to do a lot of these things. Yeah. Sometimes life, of course, gets in the way. Mm-hmm. I do feel like I'm looking at this list right now, and so I'm looking at take breaks and disconnect, and I feel like I am pretty good at that, actually. Mm-hmm. I typically take my lunch hour to go work out. We are really fortunate here at the city that we have a gym on site that we can use. And so I just walk down the hall and I go work out, and that's my lunch break. And since you're, working out, you're not sitting at your computer. So I actually disconnect during that time. I also do like to go take walks during the day when it's nice out. I just take a quick loop through downtown here, and that can really help me decompress, de-stress. It's also just a good break for your eyes too. When you sit and stare at a computer all day, it kind of helps with the eye strain. So, looking at other things on this list, I do my best to engage in self-care, I guess. I try my best to get sleep. I try my best to eat a good diet. We're human. We're never going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. But those are kind of the things that I think I work on. But I think there's always more to strive for. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. What about you, Bailey?
Yeah, I think those are all really good ones. I am more of an introvert by nature, so sometimes it can be important for me to take time to do things alone that fill me up and kind of get me de-stressed and recharged. So that can be working out, going on a run, being outside is really enjoyable and de-stressing for me in general. I also try and do stuff like journaling or reading stuff that is engaging for my mind, but maybe in a different way than how it is at work. I also do things for self-care, but try not to always have that be on a screen so that my mind's not being stimulated in that way all the time, even though that can be a way to de-stress at different points.
Yeah, I think an effective coping technique when you are burnt out, like disassociation actually, to a certain point can be really helpful. So if you need to just zone out and just like watch a junky movie.
Yeah, sometimes you need it.
Right, exactly. It's all about balance, right?
Exactly.
So should we talk about some cool research?
Yeah, let's do it. So an article that I found called Organizational Interventions in Occupational Burnout, a meta-analysis with focus on exhaustion, talks about how workplace changes impact employee burnout, specifically the exhaustion component, which is considered to be the core symptom of burnout. So basically, it looked at a bunch of different original articles that studied this topic and then put it all together in one place. So it found that organizational interventions can reduce burnout, but the overall effect is small to moderate, which still is important, and shows that organizations should be taking measures to prevent burnout in their employees. But like we've mentioned before, it's not just the employer's responsibility. It also found that interventions that change working conditions like workloads, schedules, staffing, or job design tend to be more effective than those only focused on individuals, like stress management training. It also said that exhaustion levels improved slightly across studies but varied widely depending on the type of intervention used in the workplace. So changing the work environment and not just the individual is key to addressing burnout. And like we've talked about this whole time, it is one of the keys and not the only. While organizational interventions do help reduce exhaustion, they need to be well-designed and sustained to have meaningful impact.
I really love that. I don't think there's a ton of research out there as far as actual interventions in the workplace for reducing burnout. So I like that they found that, even though it is a small effect, there is a positive impact. And so organizations can do a lot of good in terms of reducing burnout in individuals. So mine that I found, it was on nurses. So it was a study on nurses across different generations. So we talk about how different generations, they behave differently in the workplace and feel differently about work. So they studied 3 different generations. They took a snapshot in time in 2017 and in 2021, and they had nurses that were baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. And then, so here's their snapshot in 2017, high levels of fatigue and lower levels of recovery between shifts with Gen X and millennials. But then boomers were less affected by fatigue and lower levels of recovery. In addition, boomers were also least likely to report leaving their job within 6 to 12 months. And then when they came back in 2021, the snapshot looked a little different. Millennials reported significantly higher levels of low meaning and joy in their work, lower levels of resilience, higher levels of fatigue, lower levels of recovery between their shifts, and higher levels of burnout compared to both Gen X and boomers. And then millennials were the most likely to report that they wanted to leave their job within 6 to 12 months. Now, the study didn't really have any specific reasons or mechanisms that they identified as to why this is happening, but I do think it's important for employers to keep in mind so that they can try to implement some of those things that we talked about earlier. Staying consistent, building trust with employees, to try to prevent workplace burnout. And as we have, what is it now, 5 or 6 different generations in the workplace, I think it's just important for employers to keep in mind that they might need to do things differently for different age groups of their employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting to see how different generations do have different needs. And like you said, it's important for employers to be aware of that. So just as a reminder, burnout is definitely not a personal failure. It's often a systems issue, not just a motivation issue, and there are small protective habits that you can do that can make a huge difference. Prevention is going to be a lot easier than recovery, so make sure to take time to implement different things to prevent burnout for yourself, and also talk to a professional if you need to.
Yeah, so a great resource if you are of the working age. A lot of employers do have an EAP or an employee assistance program. So check that out if you have one available to you, or if someone in your household has one available. I know ours here at the City of Ames, our EAP covers anyone that lives in your household, even if they're not necessarily on your insurance plan. And if you're wondering, hey, am I approaching burnout? Bailey found this really, really cool screening tool online, and it's called the Copenhagen Burnout Index, and we will put the link to it in the show notes, so you can take it if you want to, if you're interested in learning about your own burnout levels.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us today. I hope that you learned something about burnout and can implement some new tips or tricks into your daily life.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.
Live Well, Be Well is a City of Ames podcast.